episode of Surviving the Survivor. We bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. Tonight, no exception to the rule. However, I have forgotten my glasses, I just realized, and I'm not going to get them. So you're going to get a non-glass-faced me. What a day in court today. As most of you know, I'm here in Orlando and have been at the Sarah Boone trial every single day since the beginning of jury selection. Today, just so much went on. Very, very emotional, very draining for a lot of people in there, including myself. We were going to do a second Adelson show, but court ran long once again, and we have the best guests on that. We'll get back to that on Monday. Real quickly, I just want to say something. I was invited on to Ashley Banfield's News Nation last night, to her show on News Nation.
I saw that. Great job, by the way.
Oh, thank you, Josh. I appreciate it. So you'll appreciate this, Josh. I got kind of a cold look from James Owens today, and I was told he wasn't too thrilled with me. So thank you, Debbie Martin. So I'm just going to read this because I wrote this. I tweeted it out. It's just easier for me to read it. Contrary to reporting, including my own, James Owens tells me it's 100% false that he's receiving any rights to Sarah's story in lieu of payment. Multiple sources told me that. I never run with one. This motion came out in the afternoon. That was my next line. Multiple sources close to the state informed this was in fact the case. So I mentioned this last night on Ashley Banfield's show on News Nation. After this late day motion was filed by the state regarding potential conflicts of interest between Sarah Boone and her team related to financial agreements. Again, James Owens saying it is categorically false. Now, he did not say that the private eye is not getting paid with what amounts to taxpayer money, basically welfare money, because she's considered indigent. So putting that out there, I didn't hear anything about this motion. We could circle back to it, but again, James Owens saying that he is not getting anything in lieu of payment for this. Thank you, Becky. I appreciate that very much. Before we jump right into this, Josh Ritter, as you know, former prosecutor of the year, criminal defense attorney, and most importantly, host of the amazing Courtroom Confidential, joined, you know her, the professor, Joe Patuto, professor emerita at the University of Nebraska. She is the one who helps break down things and teaches us about the law. But Josh Ritter, he's in Los Angeles, and there was a huge announcement made in LA regarding the Menendez brothers. Josh Ritter, what do we know?
Yeah, all of Los Angeles has their hair on fire right now with this announcement about the Menendez brothers, but it was pretty incredible. I mean, there was a lot of buildup and a lot of people thinking it was just a bunch of noise and nothing was going to happen. But just about an hour ago, George Gascon announced that he is resupporting an effort to have the Menendez brothers resentenced. But an interesting kind of way that he's doing it is he's not asking them to be resentenced from murder to manslaughter, but instead from special circumstance murder, which is why they are serving life without parole, to, I guess, what you would call garden variety murder, which means they would be eligible for parole. So not to get too much into the weeds on it, what he is requesting of a court, and a court will still have to order this, but that both of the Menendez brothers have the special circumstances removed from their case. They're sentenced to murder, which would be 25 to life for each murder, so 50 to life. But because they were under the age of 26 at the time that they committed the murders, they would actually be eligible for parole now. So if the judge, which is still an if, approves this, they can then go before the California Parole Board and ask to be paroled. And that could be a very real reality that within, not too long of a period of time, they could be free.
Realistically, how quickly could this process play out? How soon could the Menendez brothers walk out of prison after 35 years behind bars?
I think realistically, the judge could make a decision within the next month and a half. I think that is a reality. But then it's kind of anybody's guess as to how quickly they could get in front of the parole board. I know less about how that works, how quickly they're entitled to a hearing. And then we famously know too that a lot of times people go up for parole hearings and they're denied the first, second, or third time. They have, part of the reason they were making this play was they have an exemplary record in prison, but they're still convicted of first-degree murder. So realistically, it's harder to tell once it gets in front of the parole board. But if the parole board wanted to, you're talking a matter of months, a matter of, within a year from now, for sure.
Where we're going to stay on this. We'll likely do a show about it next week as we get more developments. But today, now it is time for Sarah Boone, and appreciate Josh's input there. And look at this, Josh. You got a subscriber from Lindsay Grandy, who's a friend of mine, friend of the show. And then look at this from Pat O'Brien. Josh is a cutie tootie. That might be your new name. Do not let your wife see that. I'll take it. Yeah. This comment here, we're going to get into why this may be the case from Manifesto. Sarah Boone is finished. Let me just run through a couple real quick things, and we're going to get to the professor. It just struck me so hard how tiny George Torres is. I mean, he looks malnourished, emaciated. Literally, I could fit like my index finger and thumb around his bicep. And that is not an exaggeration, at least from the cell phone video that we saw. What we witnessed later in the day in court today was, I think for anyone who's like, a feeling person, it was unbelievably disturbing on so many different levels. I will run through the second, I think this was a second to last cell phone video. This Joe Picciuto is now Sarah Boone speaking. She's recording, and it looks like she has a pattern of doing this. She is recording George while she is skewering him. Now, there have also been other videos in court where he's recording her back. So that right there is kind of crazy in and of itself. But in this second to last video, if I'm correct, she says, and I'm quoting now, "I'm going to effing hurt you." And that is, she used the actual word. "You're despicable." I noted here that they're obviously, they were both so drunk that they were slurring their words, like me. She says, "Don't step foot in this bedroom." She keeps on filming. "I don't like you. I don't love you. I don't want to be with you." I made a note here that in these videos that we were watching, she is the aggressor, and she reprimands him like a child. She says, "Go for a walk." He says no, very kind of meekly. She says yes. Joe Picciuto, a lot of people were worried prior to this part of the afternoon that George Torres, we didn't know him. He wasn't humanized. There's a real sense after seeing this that he's a victim, that he was an equal parts. I'm not saying Sarah Boone was not, but an equal parts victim as Sarah Boone was. How effective, in your opinion, were these videos this afternoon?
I thought they were extraordinarily effective. I cannot imagine, I kept getting up and walking away, how someone could sit in court and watch them one after the other. Her tone of voice was so demeaning to him. It was, I mean, I can't even find words to describe it. I can't imagine a parent talking to a child like that ever. And he's compliant and complacent. He doesn't become the aggressor. She tells him what to do, and he sometimes quietly objects, but that's all he does. I thought they were, as I said, I thought they were extraordinarily effective, particularly coming at the end of the rebuttal case.
Yeah. By the way, someone just asked about the jurors' reaction. When those videos, and here's Susan, when those videos, hey, Susan, how are you? Got you on camera. Susan Constantine, for those who do not know, is a body language expert. She's the owner, founder of the Human Behavior Lab, and soon to be also a jury consultant, and soon to be the author of How to Spot a Lie in 7 Seconds or Less. Is that correct, Susan?
That's correct.
I was on the spot. How to Spot a Liar in 7 Seconds or Less. We might all need that book. So back to the jurors. You know what? Susan's a jury consultant. Susan, while those videos at the end of the day were playing, the cell phone videos, what did you make of the jurors?
Well, I thought the jurors were paying, really strong attention to the videos. I mean, they were all engaged. They were very quiet. They were more stoic. They weren't making a lot of notes. They were just really paying attention to what the videos were. But keep in mind, it was close to the end of the day. They were tired. And it was reiterating over and over a lot of the same stuff over and over again. So it wasn't like new information. It just was, they saw it in video form. I'm not sure what you thought about it, Joel, but I'm not so sure that it really changed anybody's opinion. It just, to me, seemed a little bit redundant. What was your thoughts?
On the cell phone videos?
Yeah.
Or all of, yeah.
Or all the videos towards the end.
Yeah. Well, I thought they were really effective. I thought that the body cam footage actually, and I apologize if you all didn't see all this, and Josh Ritter was dealing with some Menendez stuff because he's in Los Angeles. So I'm going to kind of fill him in. The first batch of videos were body cam worn videos by deputies who had responded. They respond so much that they know George and Sarah by name. When they were playing those, they were really focused on George being arrested. And Susan, what do you think that's when those were being played, I was asking myself, isn't this helping the defense? Because they're showing George being, did you think so?
And it's weird that you said that because, I was sitting next to two other investigators, and one of them who was called on the case early on. And that we're just sitting here perplexed, wondering well, this makes no sense because this seems more in favor for the defense than it does for the prosecution, because it certainly didn't paint George Torres in any sort of positive light, because every one of those videos and calls were because allegedly George was kind of the troublemaker. He was the one that was instigating some of this domestic violence and altercations. And it just made him look so weak and frail. And they were both drunk, but it just didn't put him in a very good, favorable light. So if I were the state, I wouldn't have wanted to show those at all.
Yeah.
I don't think it helped.
Joe, since Josh didn't see them, and I'm going to come back to Josh on some of the other drama. And please, let's take a lot of questions tonight. It's been a long week for everyone. And I honestly think that having watched that, if you watched it, was so disturbing that it actually took a lot out of a bunch of us. But Joe, why show ahead of those cell phone videos? And by the way, I thought the cell phone videos, again, they were mainly of Sarah filming George while she's literally admonishing him like a child. And remember, my beloved mother said that it's pathological, and she wanted both a lover and a child, despite having a child of her own. So I thought that those cell phone videos where George was actually seemed somewhat reasonable, despite being under the possible influence of alcohol. But the body cam, Joe Picciuto, what was the purpose of all of those? Just to paint a very full picture? What do you think?
Well, I think a couple of things. One, since those body cam pictures were in discovery, if the state didn't use them, the defense could. I mean, it's like having bad. It's like trying to pull the sting in a direct examination before your defense, the adversary, has the opportunity to do in cross. So I thought what they did was primarily for that reason, to get them in. And I thought juxtaposed with then the videos they played afterwards was very effective. The other thing I think they might have had in mind was I mean, this clearly, I said at the beginning of this was a toxic relationship. I had no idea how toxic it was going to turn out to be. But I do think that to the extent that many of us still associate a DV situation with the female being the one who is being abused and the male being the abuser, that those videos of the police focusing on him every time might have been, to some extent, a subliminal message that the arrest record that we're seeing, although there were a couple of times, I think, in the record where she was the one who was the subject of the protective order and other things, but mostly it was against him. That I think segued into him being the abused partner, and maybe suggesting to the jury that the record you may have had from the arrest record as to who was who may not be entirely a full picture. But I think they had to do it, and I think the way they did it was very effective, to run those first and then run the ones with Sarah, really lacerating him. I mean, that tone of voice was really chilling, I thought.
It was like something else. Yeah, it was scary. I'll say that. So another point, I made this during the lunch break, is we were told, and I guess assumed incorrectly, that in the front row of the jury box from left to right, that the first 6 jurors were the primary jurors. We learned that that's not the case. So the guy who I kept referring to is kind of the grumpy-faced, middle-aged juror man. He is an alternate, we found out. We do not know if the DV victim is an alternate. Just because I know I'm going to forget this point, Susan, what I thought was really interesting, and I'm sure you picked up on this, toward the end of the day, one juror had advised the judge earlier in the day they could only stay till 5:30. So a few minutes before 5 o'clock, the judge said, "Hey, jury, I know one of you has a commitment. Are you able to stay till 5:30?" And they started deliberating about that. And they all were talking to each other. And Pink Blouse, Susan knows who it is, a woman in the second seat, front row, who might be a primary juror. She, during the voir dire process, really wanted to be on this panel. Don't really know her backstory. But Susan, she's the one that sort of got everyone to agree to go till 5:30. What does that tell us?
Well, she's a leader. It's one of those kind of things where they're asked a question, everybody's kind of looking around, nobody really wants to jump out of line. And then finally she's looking around thinking, well, if they're not going to say anything, I am. So, but it just shows that she does have that leadership quality, right? And so she leaned forward and then turned around and talked to the jury and literally got them to work together as a team, so to speak, to come to a conclusion. What do you want to do? And then she became the spokesperson for the group. So what does that tell us? Could she possibly become the juror 4 person? So that could very possibly happen, especially when the juror that we're talking about, Joel, that we thought for sure would probably be the juror 4 person. She would probably be second in line. I don't think the DV one would be. I don't know if she's going to end up being an alternate, but just for the mere fact that she is a DV victim, she probably wouldn't be the strong one, the best one for a juror 4 person, just because she's too emotionally tied to it. Possibly could be her. I mean, we don't know, but to answer your question, that's a leadership quality, right? She took control. So that tells you that she would probably be a good juror 4 person.
By the way, I happened to come back from lunch at the same time the jurors were being led back from lunch. And I just heard this laughter, like cackling laughter. It was all the jurors, obviously not laughing about what was happening in court, but just you can tell there's a real camaraderie. That they all seem to really like each other and get along. And Susan, does that mean, and I promise we're getting to Josh, when a jury seems to have that camaraderie, does it also indicate that they might vote along the same lines in that deliberations room?
Well, not necessarily, but I think that there's building friendships. So I think that when you're building friendships, you're building rapport, has a sense of community, that they're going to work together. I don't know necessarily I could jump to that leap where does that mean they're all going to vote the same? But generally people that have great rapport, like when I talk about juror number 1, juror number 2, the one that we pointed out, hot pink, and then the comb over guy, when they're communicating and smiling and whispering to one another, when they build a strong bond with one another, it's very hard for them to work against each other at that point because they've had this strong connection. So now, since we've got this entire panel, who, including the alternates too, they're having, it almost seems as that they're actually enjoying themselves being on this panel. Yeah. I'm sure they'll work together quite well when it comes to jury deliberations.
Yeah, it's.
I want to hear from my attorney friend over here.
Yeah, we're going to get to Josh right now. This is a very interesting comment. Lexi, thank you for the super chat. And these go a long way in helping us create the content. So much appreciated. The 911 calls established that she made the calls then in the video and basically established that she would call the police and then claim that she did not call the police, pointing to the fact that she was being manipulative and abusive. I'll be honest, I don't know that I picked up on that. Very perceptive of you, and I'm sure the jurors are smarter than I am. By the way, someone asked if any of the jurors were crying. No, but I did sort of in the live chat say that whatever we're all feeling is likely what the jurors are feeling, I believe. So one thing, by the way, the morning was absolutely the most high drama that I can remember. And it was wild and crazy. And we've already forgotten about that, which I think is a good thing. And this is what I want to come to Josh Ritter on. So Josh, the state had their rebuttal today in the morning, and they put on this expert witness, Tanya Werner. And unlike the defense witnesses, she is a forensic psychiatrist, not a psychologist. Mm-hmm. And so she just he starts his direct examination of her. And she says something along the lines of she doesn't suffer from BSS, which is battered spouse syndrome, then said like she did. And all of a sudden, James Owens just freaked out, for lack of a better word. Yeah, just really yeah. And so the direct quote from him is, "I'm being ambushed mid-trial by a change of opinion." Now, he's doing his job. I actually thought at this point that the state was in a lot of trouble. Hearing this, what is your reaction that an expert witness was accused of changing testimony? And then I'll get into what I think was really at issue. But what do you think of this initial part, Josh?
Well, it's kind of par for the course for a defense attorney to react that way. I would react that way if I were in the same situation, because witnesses sometimes change their testimony, and then you attack them for that and you impeach them with that, and you've got prior inconsistent statements, and you can handle that on cross-examination as the defense. But when the experts are changing things, that's a whole new ballgame, because you are outlining and strategizing a lot of your defense based upon what their experts are going to say. And so there really is kind of a higher standard put on realizing that their opinions especially are set in stone. Now, obviously, there could be small changes between things they may have considered and how they interpreted an interview. But if they're flat out changing an opinion, an expert opinion, that I can understand causing that kind of a reaction. Now, what I'm curious about is that my understanding was that this came out to be almost like a notice issue, right? That it wasn't so much that she changed her opinion, but she had given notice to the prosecution of that different opinion, but the prosecution failed to somehow relate that to the defense.
Yeah, I'm going to let Joe jump in. Joe, let me just real quick, Joe, just because I want to see if I'm a good student or a bad student. But the way I understood it is that she said she didn't change her testimony. what she basically meant to say was that she did originally and now basically, I don't want to say diagnose because that's evaluate her as having battered spouse syndrome, which is a byproduct of PTSD. But she said the night of the alleged crime, the night that George dies, that it didn't have the traits, it didn't have the qualities of battered spouse syndrome. And so they were making this distinction. Am I off base, Joe?
No, let me back up on it because I thought it was very confusing the way it was coming in. And partly it was James Owens. He's not clear. He starts an argument in one place. You can see the judge getting frustrated with it. You can't keep him on message in terms of what he's doing. What I understood to have happened was the doctor, the expert, when she interviewed Sarah Boone, she was unable to make some conclusions about some of the diagnoses based on the evidence that she had. So it isn't that she said it wasn't, it isn't that she said it was. What she said was, based on the evidence that I have, I'm unable to say that it was domestic, it was the DV, and it was also the other one, trying the PTSD, if I got the letters in the right order. And James Owens said, and clearly he was correct in this description, that he asked her, if you decide on the basis of reviewing your notes, reviewing the evidence, if you make a different conclusion, then you need to alert me that you've done that. Mm-hmm. She got on the stand and was about to testify, not that she had made the conclusion, a different conclusion about the underlying condition, but that she was prepared to say that the condition, whether it was the DV or anything else, was not relevant to what Sarah Boone did at the time George was put in the suitcase. And then James Owens said, well, now I've got another problem with this because she's testifying to she's taking away the jury's role, and she's testifying to an ultimate fact, that is that Sarah Boone was not in imminent danger. And the judge ultimately ruled on that and said it was not, according to Florida Supreme Court, Florida cases, it was not an ultimate fact conclusion. She was entitled as an expert to give that opinion. So it was a little nuanced. She said, I never said that I wasn't going to say this. The prosecutor got up and said, she never told me she was going to say anything different when she got on the stand. And twice he said on the record, I think maybe the defense lawyer does not understand what she's going to testify to. And she's not going to testify as to a particular change in the ultimate diagnosis. She's going to testify to the fact as to whether or not Sarah Boone was a DV victim, whether or not there's some other underlying condition. None of them were relevant to what happened at the time that George was in the suitcase and her apprehension or her claim that she was in imminent danger of serious injury or death.
Yeah, by the way, SCS Nation letting me know, which I should know, but I've been so confused about the jury numbers and keep getting conflicting answers. Yeah. But the DV juror, is a juror who will be deliberating. This is an interesting question, Susan. Do you believe that the battered spouse syndrome traits that the defense emphasized, they were talking about post-traumatic stress, heightened anxiety, all these things, do you think that this syndrome, the traits that the defense emphasized, were exhibited by Sarah Boone as the abuser? Someone made that comment that what James Owens pointed out in court today actually matches Sarah Boone and not George Torres. Do you agree with that, Susan?
I felt that that Sarah Boone did meet the criteria as being somebody that had the battered woman syndrome. I think I do. That's just my own personal opinion. When we came to the expert who was testifying today, I just could not, I couldn't wrap my head around it because I felt like she was qualified, but underqualified when it came to that particular issue. When she was asked the question did she read the book by Lenore Walker, right? She's the expert. She's the one that developed. I know
she
Lenore.
wrote the book. She wrote the book on Battered
She
Spouse.
didn't even
literally.
read this. She never read the book. So how could she speak to something she had no expertise in? If she, I mean, I know Lenore Walker well. I've worked with her on another high-profile case. So I know she's like the major expert. Well, if you're going to be testifying regarding the battered woman's syndrome, you're going to be relaying on her work, Lenore Walker's work. So she couldn't even quote it. I just felt like she was not an effective witness. I felt like towards the end there that the defense finally, after going back and forth, which we heard for ad nauseum, right? that I thought that then the defense almost turned her into the state's turned her into a defense witness. So I think she got beat up enough to where she started to agree with the defense's claims.
Yeah, I think though, once the issue was sort of resolved, and I'm going to get to Josh about this in a minute. By the way, I'm closing my eyes because I'm so fried that I'm trying to remember things from earlier in the day. So forgive me for that. But I thought the second half of her testimony was actually much more effective. She kind of came to life a little bit more, was less nervous, was much clearer in what she was saying. I think there was a lot of confusion because literally, again, to quote James Owens, he said, "I'm being ambushed mid-trial by a change of opinion." By the way, shout out to Leslie. I really appreciate it. Again, these super chats help. And I agree with you. These videos, the cell phone videos, were, to me, haunting and devastating. And they're up there for me with the suitcase video. They are going to come back to really, I think, destroy Sarah Boone here. How is Sarah's face? I couldn't see her face. You guys could better than me because I'm directly behind her. But she was talking, as usual with James Owens. The other defense attorneys seemed like they were just busy with other things. At one point, I saw Kevin Beck reading case law, and Tony Henderson was dealing with some other issues. So it was really, I think James was on an overload. Again, he's been nothing but a gentleman to me, but he had like a real sort of, I don't want to say angry, but just very frustrated way about him today. Yeah, he was really frustrated today. So Josh Ritter, back to you, because this was, it's hard to explain how tense the courtroom was in the morning. So again, Owen says, I've been ambushed. We were expecting closing arguments. Now this turns into this protracted conversation between the defense and the state. The state is bouncing up and objecting. The defense is bouncing up and objecting. And a lot of times, James Owens doesn't actually use the word object. So then Judge Michael Kranick interjected. Let me just stop there. What happens? How do you deal with, it probably doesn't happen with you because you're a good attorney, and I'm not saying that these guys are not, but I just have a feeling you're more measured, let's put it that way. But what happens in court when things start to spiral a little bit in real time, Josh? How do you deal with that?
Well, I think you do try to avoid it, but it could also be a tactic where, sometimes even on a losing argument, you might want to be pounding your fists on the table, to hope that gets you some credit with the judge down the road on other arguments that, the judge, if you can follow my logic on this, the judge is likely going to rule against you on this issue, but realizing how upset you've become about it, maybe you're going to get some goodwill out of the judge later on. I don't know if that was at play here, but I do know that to get so spun up about these things, when you're talking about some real nuanced, issues about what an expert can testify to or not, might be losing sight of the forest for the trees for either side, but it sounds like the defense side of this was the most upset by it, because end of the day, jurors, I think they appreciate what experts are saying, and I think they're trying to pay attention to it. But I also think that they're taking it in much more broad strokes than perhaps the attorneys are. And they're watching this and they're going, okay, we generally understand this idea of PTSD. We generally understand this idea of battered spouse syndrome. But we also have our gut feelings on what the dynamics of this relationship was. And probably the videotapes are having far more of an impact on them than some expert with a degree trying to tell them how they should be viewing it and what lens under which they should be viewing it. They're common sense people, and they're reacting from the gut, and they're probably looking at the dynamics of this relationship and realizing that there was, yes, abuse was taking place on both sides of it. And end of the day, did that mean that a man had to suffocate to death inside of a suitcase? And I think that putting aside all of the arguments that the jury wasn't even present for, did this actually move the needle, is probably the better question, and maybe not at all.
Yeah, that's a great point. By the way, Josh on his podcast, Courtroom Confidential, just did an episode on a real deep dive into the Menendez brothers. So you should check that out in light of what's going on today. Annie K, Lenore Walker took battered spouse syndrome, is what I call it, from battered child syndrome. And Annie K, send me an email if I'm wrong, but I believe that Annie K's father wrote the book on battered child syndrome. So we got someone in our own community very closely linked to the kind of the academic side of this. Speaking of academics, Joe Patuto, the professor, then things just got even crazier. There was a proffer offered by the state. First of all, Professor, explain what that means. What happened at that point?
Well, at that point, I think the one that you're talking about, it came after James Owens claimed he was ambushed, and that the state either implied or said that the state knew that she was going to get on the stand and change her opinion. The prosecutor got up and said, I talked to her 15 minutes before, and she told me, and that was when he said, I think maybe the defense doesn't understand what she's going to testify to. And what she's going to say is whether Sarah Boone suffers from PTSD, whether she's suffers from the DV syndrome, it doesn't matter, because at the time that she acted, she was not in imminent danger. Exactly what Josh just said. And so the proffer was, first he asked her, did you tell me you were now going to testify differently from what you had said before? And she said no. And then he went through the 2 or 3 questions. What are you going to say? And he said, and this is not shouldn't be a surprise. At which point, James Owen, what happened then was the judge decided there was a discovery violation, that the fact that she is now saying explicitly what she had said. Also, let me back up. Owens asked her, did you know that you were going to be able to say, or that your opinion included, that whatever the mental state or whatever the conditions that Sarah Boone had, that you were going to say as an opinion that it didn't mean that she was in imminent danger at the time? And she said yes. And then he said, so I've been ambushed because I asked you if you're going to say anything new, I need to know. And that's where he started. And so the judge said, it's a discovery violation, but it wasn't intentional. I don't think it's particularly material. So you get a chance now to ask the questions on the record. And then we had that dance, which he's done before. And I have to confess that it's not my favorite thing that he does, which is the judge says, point out in the record where it is, if you want me to look. And he says, well, it's in there. And then he goes off on a tangent. And the judge says that, that is not relevant to the question here. And I need to know where you want me to look in this deposition to see what you're saying. And he gives him a couple of page numbers, and then he wants to talk about the whole thing. And at one point, the judge said there are 88 pages in this deposition. I am not going to sit here and read these 88 pages to try to find out where it is you think this happened. You need to tell me. I have asked you to point out what your legal position is over and over again. And the interesting thing I find about all of it, I mean, over these days, is the judge is the one who, and it's with the state also, he's the one who comes in here and says, here are the 3 cases that answer this. And I'm going to give you the citations. Neither of the lawyers, when he's asking for that sort of support in terms of their arguments, are providing him that. He's the one that's coming in every single time with legal support for what he does. So in any event, there then was that on the record opportunity for James Owens to then re-interview the expert witness and ask the questions that he would have asked had she told him that her opinion was going to include that whatever Sarah Boone suffers from, she was not in imminent danger at the time that she left the victim in the suitcase. But I will tell. Excuse me, Josh. It was really, if you didn't get a chance to see it, I mean, it was really a show for lawyers. I'm not sure anybody else would have thought it was quite a show.
I was absolutely riveted by it. And I'm not a lawyer. Dog Mom here. I brought this comment up for a question. The comment up for a reason. James Owens is nothing but a male version of sadistic Sarah. Respectfully, have to disagree with Dog Mom, and I'm not doing this because he kind of chewed me out a little bit today, which for me as a reporter is a badge of honor, because when you get yelled at a little bit, he didn't yell at me. He was actually very nice, but he just wasn't happy that I mentioned something that was, public document on Ashley Banfield. So he's got a really tough job. I mean, he took this in 45 days. None of us know if there were really ulterior motives or not. I'd like to think not. Publicly, he has said no one wanted to represent her and she deserves the defense. And I honestly think he's doing a really good job. He's kind of all over the place a lot of times and forgets to verbally object. But then there's moments of like complete clarity with him where you can tell he's been doing this a long time. Let's get to this comment and then back to Josh. I feel that Susan is off base. I've been involved in DV police calls and I never pouted and asked for a hug from the cop. Susan, you want to react to that? I guess, Susan, there's a lot of people here a little.
I'm trying to read through all the typos and understand exactly what the question is. I feel Susan is off base. I've been involved in DV police calls and I've never pouted and asked for a hug from the cop. I don't know what he's asking or what he's talking about. I'm sorry.
I think it's a woman. It's
Be a little more clear, be helpful.
So in one of the videos, and this is really disturbing. I mean, Sarah is really drunk, obviously drunk, and George is getting arrested.
So I think what the issue is here is he used Susan. I think he meant Sarah, correct?
Yeah. He meant.
Okay, so I thought that was directed. He was asking me that question.
He meant Sarah because there is a video when Sarah at the very end said,
talking about here. I've never hugged a cop. I don't know what this is about. There is a very childlike presence about Sarah Boone, and she turns it on and off like the little girl. And then she becomes the teacher, right? Just like Joe was talking about, very punitive, talks down to George. But then when she feels like she's trying to get away, then she kind of curls up and does the little girl thing and seems helpless. And her instinct was rescue me, somebody hug me, caress me. I can't help but think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that and probably defending her in a way, but when you've lost your parents early on and your grandparents, she has no one to go to. So she's asking a complete stranger like a cop to have someone to caress her or to protect her because she hasn't had it. So it's a displaced relationship, so to speak. But I think that she looked at that as that those cops could rescue her. Odd, I know, but it's not unusual. Like Phil Waters, I remember one of the cases he did, and one of them was, if you remember this, Joel, that the defendant just broke down and finally confessed and asked Phil for a hug. Do you remember that?
I've not seen that, no,
Oh
but
my
it wouldn't
God.
surprise.
Yeah, that was that reenactment he did at CrimeCon, and the guy just gave in.
Oh yeah,
So,
oh yeah, from that, yeah, you're right.
that personal touch, that connection, person broke down, they confessed, and they wanted a hug.
Yeah. Jenny Jones with an excellent point here. Janine Jones, I think it is. I thought it's my eyesight that's failing me. I thought the body cam videos raised the question: if she called the cops this many times, why not the night of the suitcase? Interesting. I'm a little slow. The COE will tell you that. She always has to explain TV shows and movies to me. So I didn't quite catch that, but a very interesting point that someone like the COE, whose IQ is like 100 points higher than mine, would catch and would let maybe the other jurors know. So Josh, back to you. Again, I can't overstate how tense the morning was. I wasn't sure that we were going to get through it alive. At one point, the judge started to give not a ruling, but started to instruct, and James Owens just got up and started talking, and Cranick, the judge, just overpowered him with his voice. And he said, Mr. Owens, one of these. Joe, do you recall that?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, it was a moment where you really saw that Judge Cranick is in control. It was basically, the subtext was, I'm the boss here, you're not. I'm going to run this courtroom, and I'm going to tell you what's going on. But Josh Ritter, with that said, again, the way, again, I understand it is that this witness was basically saying that Sarah did not exhibit any of the things that one would exhibit typically on the day that this happened. And of course, what any good defense attorney would do was trying to, eat away at that notion. Well, you only interviewed her for 2 hours. You didn't have all the information, on and on it went. And then it got to a point where the judge had enough that he says to James Owens, he says, you're going to depose her right now in open court. And he was like, what? And I'll tell you what, he did an amazing job. So Josh, how incredibly rare is it or not to have a deposition thrown at you in court on the spot? And then his questions were really good, I thought.
So I think what they're doing here, what they call it in Florida is the deposition. What we would call it is taking somebody on voir dire. And I think we're talking about the same thing, but it's essentially, if you're trying to hash out an issue, well, then go ahead and ask your questions now, get into it. And sometimes that takes place in front of a jury. Sometimes it doesn't, but it's like, okay, we need this fleshed out. The only way we're going to get that done is to hear the actual testimony so that me as a judge, I can make a ruling. Go ahead and ask your questions now. So good on him. If he was prepared to do that, he probably should have requested it himself if he felt that that's the problem they were running into as far as when disclosures were made, when opinions were arrived at. But it sounds like, kind of getting to a question you didn't ask me, but you were speaking about in the lead up to this, is that what he's most bothered by, which I can wrap my head around, is if he felt that this expert was trying to testify to an ultimate fact, meaning a fact that the jury is exclusively supposed to be answering. And sometimes you can go do an end around for that by asking hypotheticals. Sometimes you're not asking them to actually judge the facts, but you say, well, let me present to you this hypothetical. If two people were involved in a tumultuous relationship and one of them was locked inside of a suitcase and you give them essentially all this scenario we're presented with, and then you say, do you believe that that person was acting under PTSD or was, in imminent peril at that time? And you can start asking those usually ultimate fact type questions. But if it is, I think, a problem and a thing that any good defense attorney worth his salt would stand up on his shoes about, is if you feel like somehow this person, as an expert and being presented to the jurors as an expert, is going to give them the answer to a question that is ultimately going to be a question reserved for them. That would be something I would get upset about as an attorney, is because that's the last thing you want to have happen, is them to go back into the deliberation room and go, well, that expert told us X, Y, and Z. What are we even doing back here deliberating this point? But it sounds like it may have been a little more nuanced than that, and he kind of missed it, which I don't know. It sounds like he may be missing more than just that issue in this case.
Yeah.
Joe,
I don't know if
that
you know,
to be a dirty trick there, but it.
Yeah. Watch, I'll get yelled at again tomorrow, Josh, for
Right.
you. From Little Lamb here to Joe, a lot of people are wondering why they didn't ask Brian more about kind of the abuse that he suffered at her hands. So they were asking if they can bring Brian's interview. I don't know if they mean a deposition or a police interview into evidence. I guess there's about 40 minutes remaining of the rebuttal and then the closings. Can they bring it back at one of those points, Joe?
Yeah, I didn't even know they had. I guess they do have a tape of his interview, and they didn't ask him. I mean, that was a very quick, direct examination of him when he testified to begin with. I think, given that the issue, I mean, typically you can't bring in prior bad acts or reputation evidence, but since it's at issue on both sides, I'm assuming that under Florida evidence law that they could, but I don't know. They've got so much evidence running around in here, whether this particular piece of it, which would lead to a side issue and another set of arguments between the lawyers with regard to the examination of, if not Brian, of looking at that tape. I'm not sure that, I mean, at some point you don't want to keep going and arguing side issues. You want to try to stay on the straight and narrow. I would add that with regard to James Owens today, what I see him doing is he seems to be like, I don't know if it would be a plane, but he has to circle around his argument before he finds it. And I don't know whether it's that he can't get to it until he's argued around it, or whether it's his way of presenting himself in front of the jury. But when he gets to the meat of the argument, I think he's really very, very good. And I agree with you, Jill, that that examination he did of her at the end was really, great. And it would have been great whether he had fully prepared for it. Certainly great if he's doing it, on the spur of the moment. But it took him a while to get there, and he had to have the judge push him into it.
Yeah, I think he'd be better served if he was a little more focused on the matter. I think he's getting too emotional. Look, that happens to me on the tennis court. I'd start throwing my racket, and it doesn't help your game very much. Look at this. Copper Horse, who's one of our mods and is from the great state of New Jersey, gifting 50 Surviving the Survivor memberships. Cannot thank you enough. Oh, my God. This is from COE. Beyond generous. Thank you for your endless work. These mods are unreal. They help us more than you know, and they help us behind the scenes. It is a real team effort. We're basically, I was just going to say something that would get me in trouble because I was going to name a specific place. But we're like a cable news network with basically a very small crew. That's what I will say. And we do it day in and day out. And these mods are exceptional. COE keeping us, she's the glue that keeps us together. Space Coast on the West Coast, great guy, but I'm rooting for the Yankees tomorrow night in the World Series. And sorry, Josh. Yeah. Joe and I got to bring Josh and Spacey on, and of course Steve Cohen. Can't forget Steve Cohen. So the World Series, I forgot. I'm excited now. It starts tomorrow night. Real quickly about tomorrow. Now that I mentioned tomorrow, they talked about this at the end of court today. In the morning tomorrow, the judge suggested this because they've got to have their charging conference. And so it's going to take a while to go through the instructions and the rules and all of this. So he suggested, hey, why don't we all come in at 8 o'clock? He said, I get up at 5:30 in the morning. The defense, who I heard slept two and a half hours last night, they looked like they were going to have a collective heart attack. They did not want to come in early. And I understand because I feel their pain. So it was funny. Tony Henderson, the second chair, gets up and says, Judge, can we split the difference? So the lawyers are all going in at 8:30 to meet in open court with the judge. I'll probably come a little bit late. And they're going to go over the jury instructions, and that's going to take a while. Then the state said that they would need about 40 more minutes. He had previously mentioned that they were going to read some text messages that I imagine are going to be unhelpful to Sarah Boone's case. Let's put it that way. And then the defense, I don't know why they would indicate this. Let me ask you, Josh. They already indicated that they're not going to rebut anything that the state says. There's no witnesses coming. There's no one they could cross. Is it a bad idea to say that before you hear what the last 40 minutes is, Josh?
No, I think they probably know what's coming. They probably know that they've pushed this judge and jury to their limits of patience and attention. And, they're also not just entitled to start rehashing old issues. It has to be something that they haven't already presented or adequately addressed through impeachment. In other words, some new issue that somehow arose during the rebuttal case might entitle them to that. I think, but more than anything, they're probably reading the writing on the wall that they just need to get this to the jury.
Look at this from Nicole Longo. This is out of left field, but I love it. Josh's voice is giving me Peter Van Zandt 48 Hours vibes. Fascinating.
I'll take it.
Yeah, Josh, I'm not jealous at all. Good. It's good on you. Joel, is George's family in court? George's family is not in court. They have been in court. Sarah Boone's purported girlfriend from jail has been in court, but I haven't seen her. A lot of people have some very interesting psychological theories about Sarah Boone, that maybe she was a closeted lesbian, and that's why she has all this pent-up anger. But that is a discussion for another day. But yes, she had a girlfriend there. Susan, you leaned over from the second row to me in the front row and said, you're getting Johnny Depp, Amber Heard vibes. How come?
Yeah. Well, because the filming back and forth, and then they're it's like they're telling on each other all the time. And they're in this drunken or high state all the time, both of them, right? So he's got the camera, she's got the camera, and they're like videoing each other. I said, this is like Amber Heard and Johnny Depp replay here.
Could I
go ahead, Josh?
That's such a good point, because I think the jurors are seeing that too. And when you're bringing a defense of self-defense and battered spouse syndrome, you would expect that it would be so clear to the jurors how you were the truly victimized one, and that you were left with no alternative but to make this awful, awful decision to try to escape this cycle of violence. And this led to this person's tragic death. But when you see people who, quite frankly, are just a mess on both sides, and it's a never-ending, perpetual, just kind of drunken argument that these people are getting into, that doesn't create the kind of sympathy that wants to forgive someone for allowing the other person to suffocate to death inside of a suitcase. I really feel that the defense wanted to present this defense, argued for it, got it in, but at the same time that allowed in good for the goose, good for the gander type evidence, and that may backfire on them when the jurors at the end of the day are going to go, these people were awful on both sides, but this man ended up dead, and in a very, very awful way at her hands.
Yeah. And I think that when I think about this case, I go, okay, so I think it's well substantiated that she's been abused, no doubt. But at the end of the day, one person is dead and one is crying for help. and she's there taunting him. And I think it's really going to boil right down to that. And to your point, Joe, when they're talking about how she was treating him, demeaning him, and in those videos towards the end, I think that's the reason why the state didn't have to bring out as many witnesses, because Sarah Boone incriminated herself. And I said, at closing arguments, they're going to start to bring all this forward. And then those videos, I think, just substantiated that she was the taunter, and that somehow George, out of his stupidity, which we now know he just does stupid things, probably did get into that suitcase, and then she zipped it up, and they're laughing and joking until it wasn't funny anymore. And then she turned into the other Sarah Boone and started to taunt him like the teacher, like the parent, and then went upstairs, went to sleep, knowing that more than likely he was going to die. I think she knew that. How could she not?
Yeah. By the way, this is Joe.
I
Real
would
quick.
agree with everything there. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Joe. We're on a little delay, but Davina here says, "Did you notice how he called her ma'am?" This is true. At one point in the video, was a quick. He called Sarah ma'am. You know, I need Carm on to discuss that one, but Carm said that it's just, again, a very pathological relationship where he was part lover, part child. And the fact that he's referring to her as ma'am was really disturbing. I mean, I can't tell you, I might actually have some nightmares about it. I don't usually get affected. I've seen a lot, I think, you know, but this was just a very dark world that these two lived in that was exposed to us, and many other people are living this life right now as we speak. So it's kind of frightening and jarring. But
Joel, let me ask you a question. Did you almost kind of feel like you were like invading their privacy today? They were bringing us into this place. It's kind of like, you almost felt like you were like a voyeur or something, you know, you were like in the middle of this thing, and it's like, I don't really want to know all this stuff, and I don't want to be a part of this, but these two people are crazy.
Well, I'm glad his family was not there today, because she was so awful, and he was so at times submissive and compliant and complacent. I mean, it was just awful to see. The only objection I was going to make, Susan, was describing what she was doing as what a teacher does. I think is a bridge too far. I mean, you would be fired if you came even close to that sort of thing. And you know, it's just and the picture. I mean, it seems to me, for the jury, the picture of her on the stand, contrast it with the picture of her in the videos, paired with 11 minutes where she is going to describe something that they see nowhere in the interaction in the videos, and they don't hear it in his voice, and they got the medical experts saying he's getting weaker and weaker as it goes. It's a really powerful case, I think.
Yeah. By the way, I didn't finish off about tomorrow. Denise is correct about this. Also, if you appreciate the content and the best guests, please subscribe. Please hit the like button. And you can also support us on Patreon, which is a huge help to creating some amazing content. So we appreciate it. Tomorrow. So after the state rests with the rebuttal, there are going to be jury instructions. And then they said they're expecting closing arguments somewhere. This is obviously, they said today, so it's obviously subject to change. Josh has to wrap, so I'll let him get a final thought in real quick. But bottom line is, very quickly, that they're going to they're targeting between 1 and 1:30 p.m. Eastern time for the start of deliberations. I asked Ryan Vestio, who's a former homicide prosecutor in this county, how long do you think they're going to deliberate? He said somewhere between 3 and 6 hours. So closings are done by 4. They might deliberate till maybe 9 o'clock tomorrow night, and that we could get a verdict. And I'm going to stick around for that. I don't know how I'm going to do that. And then I will be providing information in the live chat, and then might have the COE either do the wrap-up show, or I'll just stay here an additional night before driving home to see my little kiddos. Josh, final thoughts before I know you need to go. Make sure you subscribe and check out Courtroom Confidential. Josh Ritter, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, I After seeing this rebuttal case today and seeing the level of domestic violence, or whatever you want to call it, just the turmoil that was taking place inside of that home, it makes you wonder a couple of things. At least it did for me. Is one, perhaps that's why the prosecution was not all that concerned with this defense coming up, because they knew that would open up the door. Two, perhaps that's part of the reason that she's gone through 8 attorneys, is 8 of them have told her this is a bad defense. It's going to open up the door to all of this other awful type of stuff.
By the way, before, I did not mean to interrupt, but I did because I interrupted. The very first attorney, I didn't know this until yesterday, was trying to use this battered spouse syndrome. So I thought that was interesting. Go ahead.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But also, we also got to see a lot of her personality after we saw her testify. So, if jurors, if the idea that jurors' memories are kind of most sensitive to what they just saw, they heard her testify. I felt she actually did fairly well for herself.
Mm-hmm.
She may have done, scored a little some points with people, but then when you really see the reality of these people outside of a courtroom, the tide may have changed on this whole thing.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of my hot take on today's developments.
Yeah. Well, Josh, thank you so much. Again, Josh is covering Menendez, the Menendez brothers. Looks like they're going to walk free. Check out that episode on Courtroom Confidential. Send my love to the family, Josh, and we will talk soon.
You guys were fantastic. Thank you. Sorry I had to go early, but good to see you all. Take care.
No worries.
Bye.
Take care. So Coco and Kittens, wait, Owens yelled at Joel. He did not yell at me. We had a very cordial conversation in the hallway. He's right. He's justifiably a little bit on edge. And I was told by another counsel on his team that he was a little upset that I talked about this memo. But, that's why we have journalists. This memo was filed. This motion, I should say, was filed last night. And again, it has to do with payment to the defense team. Only one member, who's a private investigator, is reportedly being paid, and that person is being paid directly by Sarah Boone, but Sarah Boone is indigent, as it said in the motion. So she's effectively paying with taxpayer money, and the state wants to make sure there is no conflict at all there after the fact for a possible appellate issue. So the state was trying to clear this, and then there's multiple sources telling us that in lieu of payment, James Owens took basically, this is something I heard Jose Baez did with Casey Anthony. Instead of payment, he got the rights to her story. So however, James Owens categorically denies it, says it's 100% false. So I am going to take him at face value and say it is not true. That is what he is telling me directly. So he didn't yell, and that was the whole drama there. Joe, just not a law question, but when you saw George, there were a couple of angles where you could just see his arm and his chest and his legs. What was your reaction to seeing that? I mean, it honestly, as a son of a Holocaust survivor, it reminded me of pictures I saw in Auschwitz. But Joe, what was your reaction, Joe?
Clearly, he's very small. He looks like a child almost. Very, very small, very thin. It makes it a little easier to imagine how he could have managed to get into that suitcase, which was completely impossible to imagine until you look at him. But it wasn't just the size that struck me with him. It was in those videos how submissive he was to her browbeating him, and it just surprised me. I mean, he reacted at a couple of points, but mostly it was whatever she said, he responded to in a way that she was in charge and he was just following her lead. It was a very different picture from the picture of him that I had in my head up until I saw those videos. Very different.
There was one video though where he did come after her. Do you remember that?
I do.
So I agree with you, very submissive. And I thought this very same thing. I thought, here's this really tiny little skinny little man. And all I could think of was how he could have been curled up inside of that suitcase. I saw how easily it was for him to fit inside of here. I mean, I don't even know if I know a man that's his age that was that skinny. So I don't know if that was from drinking or from drugs, but his teeth were all rotted out too.
Yeah.
I don't know if you noticed
Well, look,
that.
yeah, listen, I think both of these people are very, and George is not here to defend himself, anymore, but I think it's very clear that they're both extremely disturbed, both alcoholics, whatever the new term is, both, probably, likely medicated, but medicated mostly with alcohol. And they were said to have a nice relationship, which is very indicative of this whole, abusive relationship, a nice relationship when they were not intoxicated, but then it got super violent and antagonistic when they were. Look at this from Phyllis Wall. Thank you all for allowing us to watch, and for the guests who help us understand. Again, I cannot overstate how much the super chats help. Really appreciate it, and can't thank you enough for that. So I made a note, which I thought was kind of funny on my part, but not that funny, but I just want to share it with Joe Patuto. So after while this was going on in the morning and James was just going on, it just reminded me, like, everyone was anticipating this narrative testimony from Sarah Boone that never came, but we got the narrative testimony from James Owens. Were you surprised how long that went on for? It went on for well over an hour, if not more.
Yeah, I was because this judge, I think, is really in control of his courtroom. And when he wants to step in and say enough is enough, he does. He is not the least bit reluctant to cut things off. And he let that go for quite a while. But I think part of it was trying to figure out what it was that James Owens' objection was. Because the judge had not read that 88-page deposition, could not get him tied down to explain what it was that he thought the violation was, and he wanted him to have a full opportunity to do it. And as I said before, Owen seems to have this, I'm going to just circle and circle and circle until I finally find the nut of the argument, and then he's really good, but he doesn't get there immediately. And that hour, and I think Josh was exactly right, and I think, Joel, you said the same thing. He was very angry and felt he had been lied to about what she was going to testify to. And in a way, I don't want to, the Adelson, this reminds me of Daniel Rashbaum in the Adelson case early on, when he had that, what I called a hissy fit, because he thought he had some sort of agreement, and they went on and on and on about it. And I think James Owens, and I've said this about the defense team, they don't always seem to be in line or hearing what it is that the judge is saying he wants. And I don't think they're playing games with it. Maybe they're tired. Maybe they've got too many things going on. But you can hear or I can, and I think a lot of the people in the chat a lot of times can hear what the judge wants, and he's not able to hear it the first time. So yes, that's a long answer, Joel, but yes, I was surprised it took as long as it did. But I think that was he circling and the judge wanting to give him every opportunity to get to what it was he was so unhappy about.
Yeah, and I thought he did a phenomenal job, the judge, patient, very, very patient. There was that one moment where he let James know that he's the boss, but he was really patient. He's very, he's just incredibly clear, lucid. He understands the law. He knows the case law. This is for another discussion at another time, but Joe, for the life of me, I do not understand how these people on the fly, like he's suddenly citing all this case law with, statutes, and I don't understand the inner workings. I might have to go to law school. Joe, I might need a recommendation to a law school, and then I'll have to have you'll have to do all my work and take my test. I just want the degree.
I wouldn't say any time about that, but
from Lee T here, Did the panel notice that the body cam videos showed George being calm and compliant? I noticed that right away. So let me take you. One of the body cam footage clips comes from June 15th of 2019. June 15th of 2019. By the way, I'm going to go to the bottom of the chat. This is the time now. If you have questions for the best guest, please put in the triple Q, and I'll spend the remaining moments of the show, next 15 minutes, just taking questions as I bring in some of the things that I jotted down from my notes as we go. But I think this was one of the first body cam clips from, again, June 15th. They're going there to arrest George. He says he was drinking. He's very open about it. And the police officer says, she says, you hit her. And he's really perplexed in that moment. He's like, what? And the police officer says she has a lump on her head. And he's like, I don't know where that lump came from. How did she get the lump on the head? The police officer says, I don't know. And then you hear kind of like a primal scream from Sarah coming out of nowhere. And the deputy turns around and yells at Sarah, saying, you're interfering, remain outside. I thought that was very telling. Susan, I don't know if you remember that exchange specifically, but it seemed genuine that he did not hit her, that she struck him. The bump on the head, though, is the mystery. So I don't know.
Well, I don't think that was the only time. I think there was a couple times where he was arrested and he kept asking, are you cuffing me? Why are you cuffing me? He was, when I was looking at his facial expressions, and then there was another one where he was interrupted when he was in bed sleeping, and he was kind of bewildered when Sarah come walking into the room. It's like he was like uncertain of what she was asking, what she was wanting. And he has that very submissive nature that he has, wanting to seek to understand what it is that she was asking for. And it's the same thing that he was doing with the police officers. He was trying to figure out, why are you arresting me? I don't understand. But again, what does he do? He submits right underneath the police officer's suggestion. You got to put your hands behind your head, and you start reading him his rights and throw him in the back of the car. So I don't know if that had to do with that he doesn't have recall because of the alcohol. It could be that. Or he's just in denial. He doesn't want to admit to it. And he doesn't want to admit to it, even if there was domestic violence. So I'm uncertain about that at this point, whether he was being honest about the fact that he didn't really understand what Sarah was stating, that he was he had abused her. So it's incomplete for me.
Oh, there you go. So after all those videos today, is it the consensus of the board? It was the nail, I guess, of this panel. What about this, Joe Patuto? These videos, is it too hard to overcome, coupled with the suitcase video, coupled with the fact that there needs to be imminent danger per the case law, which it doesn't appear there was? What do you think, Joe?
I think so. I think in part it will still depend on closing arguments and whether the state can tie all this together in a really persuasive, effective way. But I think so. In fact, Susan, you said looking at him, you could understand how it was all a joke when he got in the suitcase. I looked at it and thought the way he submits to her, I wouldn't find it surprising if she said, get in the suitcase. And so he got in the suitcase. I mean,
I agree.
I certainly think, Joel, that this puts the case in a much stronger place than it was after she testified there. I don't think there's any question about that.
Not only that, Joe, too, with all of the videos, I don't know if you guys noticed this or not, but in none of those videos did any of them get involved in any sort of play. No puzzles, no painting, no nothing. They're just both constantly in this drunken stupor the whole time.
Yeah. It's really upsetting to watch. From Lee here, did anyone notice in the steel photograph and the video of the suitcase? I'm not sure what the steel photograph is. I'm sorry, but in the video of the suitcase that it was zipped up 100%, unlike how Sarah demonstrated in front of the jury. Susan, is this the kind of thing that jurors are going to take, really look into when they watch this video? Was it zipped all the way? I don't know if you can tell, to be honest, from the vantage point that she shot that video from, but is it something that the jurors are going to want to know?
I do, because there's discrepancies. What the state is saying is that he could only get his 2 fingers out, right?
Right.
Sarah Boone's saying his whole hand was out. So there's a big difference there. Was the fingers out or were the hands out? Because if the hand is out, he could kind of whip it around. But there's no way he could have done it with the two fingers. And the other thing is too, I think that the zipper around that suitcase wasn't stripped to where you couldn't, even if you had 2 fingers, couldn't open it up. But to keep in mind, she was like the lion tamer with the bat, jabbing him to say, and she was saying, shh, shh, shh to him every time he was crying out, and the shushing, and then the whack. It was like whack-a-mole to me.
Yeah.
I think that in itself, was so demonstrative. It's going to be hard to get that visual memory out of their heads.
Ida Shaw says, I skipped her note. I want Susan and Pro Joe to see our appreciation. Please. Thank you. There you go. They've now seen it, and you got a kiss blown to you from Susan. This is it. I thought I read this out loud. Am I losing my mind, COE? I thought I just read this, but thank you, Ida, for the super chat. I'll say it once again, just the way the judge reads instructions to the jury every time. And he's like, sorry to be redundant, but these super chats do help a ton. So we really appreciate it. I keep saying it. Judge Cranick also looks a little bit like Ted Cruz, a younger, better looking, maybe
I like
nicer
that
version. Yeah, he's a good judge. So another interesting thing, and then I promise we will slowly start to wrap, but it was a lot to go over. One of these 911 calls, yes, Dr. Berry, thank you for saying this, because I agree with you. George seemed genuinely shocked and confused to me. I agree with you 100% on many of these videos. There were a couple of body cam videos, Joe, that they played where George had a no contact order that he was breaking, Joe. Why does that help the state? Why show that?
Well, I don't think it does necessarily help the state, but again, those videos are all part of the evidence, and the defense would be available to the defense. And I think, and Susan may be able to speak to this better than I, but I do think that with a jury, providing everything on your side of the case is much more effective than leaving something out and letting the other side point out that you didn't give the whole story. That's never helpful. So you bring it all out, you let the jury see everything, you say you're the trier of fact, and we're giving you the full picture from which to make the conclusion.
Yep.
Exactly Amy Smith here with a super chat. I think she made him get in the suitcase and she pushed it down the stairs. Neighbor heard some loud banging. Obviously, the defense, they took that banging and the thud sound, which the neighbor said shook the wall, and they said, no, it was George dragging Sarah down. I find that questionable, to say the very least.
Particularly since she never said anything about it before. I mean, her interviews are not damning only because of what she said, but of what she didn't say that was really critically important at the time that she's now saying after the fact.
Yeah. Interesting comment from Suzanne Firefly, or Susan. I'm just not buying the battered spouse syndrome. Yes, she was bruised, cut, black eyes, etc. I feel she liked the attention, good or bad. It was attention. I'll tell you this, I'm a DV survivor myself, and that's a very interesting perspective to get from another DV survivor. I've heard a lot of other DV survivors, and many are in this community, saying that she just doesn't exhibit the tendencies or the attributes of a DV survivor. Case in point, number one is that she just went right up to that suitcase. Another point that people made today is that a DV survivor would never in the moment film the aggressor. They'd be too nervous. They'd just be too scared to be filming it. She was like almost like getting off on the fact she was able to videotape him. It was disturbing. But back to the videotapes on 8/29/2019. So this is, a year before. I'm bad with math, but close enough. The officers, the deputies arrive. Sarah Boone right away said she was punched in the neck. George is arrested again. And then George, in a very kind of meek tone, goes, "Sarah, are you serious?" Kind of like the way he was speaking in the suitcase. And I'll be honest, I don't know if he meant, "Sarah, are you serious that you're telling on me?" or "Sarah, are you serious? I never punched you in the neck." The next video comes from September 5th of 2019. In this one, the deputies have their guns drawn. They go upstairs. That was disturbing to me. He looks so gaunt. This is the one where he's just sitting on the edge of the bed. And I was wondering, like, how does this guy even get through the day? Like, how does he have the energy with all that? He's a chain smoker and all that alcohol in that little body. And the police officers, they know him. So once they realized he wasn't a threat, they started talking to him. And the officer says, "What happened today?" And he says, "I don't know." And then he admitted, he said, after like he kind of got his wits about him, I think he was nervous with the police there. He said, "We had a discussion and I am in the wrong, but I really don't know what happened tonight." What's that?
He says, "I'm always in the wrong." Multiple times he said that.
Yeah, he said that. And he said, again, then he goes back, says, "I don't know what happened tonight." The officer says, "Well, George, you were hiding in the bathroom." And this was his response, Susan. "My wife," he calls her his wife, unless I totally misheard it. "My wife is nuts and always puts it on me."
Yeah.
What do you make of the fact that he referred to her as his wife? But he sounded genuine when he said this. What did you make of that?
Well, he referred to her as his wife at one moment, and then another time as his fiance. So apparently he had asked her to marry him a couple of different times, right? So I think that he saw this relationship as a marriage relationship. They were cohabitating together. He had asked her to marry him. I don't know whether she said yes or not, but it just shows that's how he feels about her as a partner, not just a boyfriend or girlfriend. In fact, it was really interesting. Sarah was asked a question about one of the incidents, and she said, "Well, I guess you could say we're boyfriend and girlfriend. Remember that?"
Yeah. Yep.
And I thought that was odd because that shows separation. Boyfriend and girlfriend, in statement analysis, that is not a close relationship. That's not how he would describe your partner. I guess he's my boyfriend. We're boyfriend and girlfriend. Kind of like infantile, like little kids, like we're just starting to date.
Yeah, interesting. Alicia Elliott here. She made him lie and take the blame on video for her getting in trouble. So why not blame him for other things? I agree with you 100% on that. One of the other interesting things that struck me about this footage, when the deputies are going in with guns drawn, everything kind of calms down and they're questioning him, and there's just a loud knock on the door. They open the door. It was almost like she looked like the poltergeist. It was Sarah Boone standing there, and she goes, "Can I have some water?" Susan, you're the expert here. I mean, what the hell was that about? I mean, it's just, she just can't, did she just have to be in control? Did she want to know what was going on? She always asks for water. Every morning she asks the bailiff, or James Owens, to ask the bailiff. He brings her 2 cups of water. But what was the deal? I was actually like, oh my God, she's at the door. But what was the deal with that?
It was strange because what was stranger to me is that when the officer said no, she turned around and walked away. It was just like, oh, okay. And she walks away like a little kid. She reminded me of just a child, an infant.
Crystal, I'm sorry to hear this, but she says, as a child of addicts, I've seen the scenarios depicted in videos played out in real life time and time again. I think they showed who Sarah really is. I think they showed who Sarah really is. Thank you for sharing that, Crystal. And look, a leopard doesn't change its spots. We saw her in real time on that video, not in real time, but in the moment on video. And I'm sure it could have been a lot worse even behind closed doors. So the bottom line here is, and Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, I saw this happening today because, we're all talking in the gallery, and everyone with this kind of very difficult morning for the state, he's blowing it. It's over. Sarah's going to walk. There's so much going on in a trial. There's so many moments in a trial. But I think at the end of the day, these jurors are going to go back. They're going to see the suitcase video. They're going to see this cell phone video. They're going to be instructed that it has to be imminent danger. And I feel like it is going to be game over for Sarah Boone. And my off base are close here.
No, I agree with you.
That's
Yeah,
it.
as a trial consultant, the one thing that I've never been able to predict is exactly what that verdict is going to be every single time. So I thought that Casey Anthony would have been found guilty no matter what. And look what happened with that one. I thought that George Zimmerman would have been found guilty. He wasn't. So you just never know when they get behind closed doors, and especially the person that's the DV victim. We don't know at this point whether Sarah Boone resonated with her or if she was appalled by her. We don't know that yet because she's not showing those signs. And the other thing is that when they get behind closed doors, that's when they start to open up and start to share their own personal experiences. And how is that going to affect how they're going to project what they know and what they've experienced, and then seeing Sarah Boone and what she could have done differently. So I don't know. They'll come up with their own hypothesis, and we'll find out what the verdict is. But as I'm with both of you guys, I can't see beyond the fact that he was vulnerable in the suitcase. She had full control. She could have got him out. Game over. To me, that's how I see it. I hope the jury sees it the same way, because that is what happened.
Yeah, and I would add, you can always pick, no matter what the circumstances, the outlier situation that doesn't conform to the way we think it would happen, because nothing ever goes 100%. So, we've gotten Casey Anthony, to me, is the poster child for this. But, we don't talk about all the cases in which the evidence was there and the jury came in with a guilty verdict. They're not, it's like the dog biting the man biting the dog. It's the exceptional one we see, but it's the exception. And I think we're justified in saying, based on the evidence and based on the way we think jurors should be reacting, that it's going to be a guilty verdict, always admitting that this could be the outlier case that goes in a different direction. I just don't see it happening here.
There's always a possibility. I don't see it happening. I'd be really surprised. Again, Janet, thank you for sharing this. As a survivor of an abusive drunk, I see George as a submissive drunk and her being abusive. I agree with you on that. The last cell phone video, very quickly, it's George filming her and she's filming him, which is just weird, insane. And he's saying, Sarah is like basically just drilling him with questions. And he says, Sarah, like a very calm voice, nobody says you can't have friends. He says, I just don't want you to go frolicking around with male friends. And that's when he says, are you filming me, filming you? He actually seemed sad in that moment. Like he actually cared about her, which makes it even more heartbreaking because it's just so incredibly dysfunctional. Fly Guy in a Blue Sky, I like that name. Joel, what do you or the panel think of Sarah's reason for making the video? Susan, that's your world. What do you think? Why make all these videos to begin with?
Because she wants to penalize him. She wants to use it as evidence to penalize him. Let me show you. Same thing. Amber Heard and Johnny Depp. Amber Heard was doing the same thing when he was down in his luck. She was videoing him so that she could use it as evidence. Like, let me show you what you're doing. To humiliate him. That's what it is. And she thinks that she's going to whip him into shape. That somehow he's going to magically see his fallings, and he's going to see it on video, and therefore he's going to conform and be a better person. It's delusional.
Yeah. By the way, I do give the Will J sock update every morning. I tweet it out at Podcast STS. I think today, I can't even remember because now the days are blending. I think it was a gray socks with a scarlet logo again of something, unless I'm completely wrong. And that was yesterday's sock update. But Will J wears colorful socks, let's put it that way. And I tweet about it at Podcast STS. You can follow us on Instagram at Surviving the Survivor. You can follow my dogs if you want a little relief. Instagram at Fred Ethel STS. And I don't know if you've heard, but I have a book out, and it's about my beloved mother, a child Holocaust survivor. 15% the Holocaust, 85% her yelling at me and giving life advice. And it's a nice change from all of this insanity. It will lift you up, and it will change how you see things, particularly if you are a survivor of anything. So there you have it.
May I ask
Sure
Susan a question?
Before you do that, I just want to say Joe Patuto is unbelievably kind, unbelievably generous. I told the COE we've got to send her a gift basket, but she's been donating her time, and her insight's incredible, and we cannot thank you enough. And if you want to do it tomorrow, Joe, if you want to do it tomorrow, you're welcome.
Love to do it tomorrow, but I can't. I'm traveling, so I'm not even going to watch it until late tomorrow night. Okay. Susan, the question of the videos, they talk about, and let me start out by saying I don't want to make any kind of analogy, direct analogy here, but some killers who keep souvenirs of victims, child abuse situations where they video it, and then they go back later to enjoy looking. Yeah. And I'm just wondering that part of her psychology is, I'm in control, I'm dominant, I'm taking these, and I can go back and look at how much I am in charge, how compliant he is, how much I can get him to do what I want as part of the, that psyche of being in control.
Yeah, that's such a great question. We could do a whole show on that, because when I wrote my book, I did a whole section just on predators. And I see this kind of a predatorial type of thing too. And in a way, what I found, especially when I talked to Ann Burgess, who she is like the master in all of this, is in some sort of way, there is former pain that they want to project that pain on their partner. It's like they get satisfaction out of it. There is a form of healing. It's almost ritualistic. It's a release of some sort of fracture or pain that they've had. They've never been able to overcome. So anyway, it's fascinating. I hope that you get a chance to read my book, because I'll talk a lot about that particular subject, about how they cube things, how they're able to disassociate from and live a normal life and yet be killer during the day or killer during the night, and flip around and be the perfect husband and father and church leader. It's amazing.
Susan's book, How to Spot a Liar in 7 Seconds or Less, which is really interesting. I'm looking forward to reading it. It's coming out. It's a little ways off still, right? Before it comes out, Susan?
Yeah, not till July. Probably drop 1 week before CrimeCon Denver.
There you go. And look at this. My mom bragging about me. That's sweet. That actually makes me very happy. Yeah. I submitted to my first book, and I submitted to my very first book award ever. And I was notified that I was not a winner, but a finalist.
Well, that's good.
So I get a special little seal that says finalist. So there's a couple of really big book awards, and I'm looking forward to hearing about those. For those interested, Carmen and I actually got invited to the Miami Book Fair. If anyone's in South Florida, that's coming right up, and I'll let everybody know about that. But again, can't thank the guests enough. I am totally delirious. I found an awesome little like pizza place, probably the worst thing for me, but I'm going there right after this just to decompress. I suggest everyone else decompress. Tomorrow I'll be back right in the courtroom. By the way, they're starting again at 8:30. I'm probably going to get there a touch late because I don't want to listen to lawyers talk about instructions. It's not too interesting, so I'll get there in time for the interesting stuff. And I'm going to stay. People said, please stay for the verdict. I'm going to stay. The verdict goes to Monday. I have to get permission from the COE. This is true. The socks today, they were gray with red lips on the socks, up and down. The socks, the logo yesterday was yesterday. It was some kind of college logo. Today, gray socks with kisses on them. Will J, there's something about him that scares me a little bit, so I'm going to wait till this is all over, and then I'm going to tell him that I was giving a sock update every day, and I'm going to run away from him after I say that. Did George's brother speak? And if so, what day? I'd like to hear from him. Juan Torres spoke the very first day, just to give a little bit of information on George. From Jenny. Jenny, thank you. Thank you so much, Joel, COE, Space Coast, Steve Cohen, and you mods. You are the best. Really appreciate it. Joe, have a safe trip tomorrow. Susan, are you coming back to court tomorrow, Susan? You're back tomorrow, Susan? Did she freeze up? She froze up. But Susan, I think, is coming back. We will see her tomorrow. Love you, Orlando. Love you, New Jersey, my home state. And Susan, are you coming back to court tomorrow?
Yes, I am. I'll see you there.
See you guys tomorrow. Have a good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.